Hi. So last day we actually stopped at this distance method. So we discussed how we can actually identify and how we can actually there are two methods of finding the sequence alignment, right? Find the best alignment. There's two methods. One is the distance method, another is the similarity method. And we found out that both of these result and both of these method actually converge and they give the same result, right? So it doesn't matter which method you follow, you can follow either of them and they are both going to give you the same kind of result. But as we know that now we perform this checking and we actually try to align a very small sequence together, composed of 8 or 10 nucleotides. But in reality that's not the case. There are a huge set of the nucleotide sizes are huge, because a particular gene they consist of almost thousands and thousands of nucleotides, right? They are composed of almost lakhs of nucleotides. So it's really difficult to align them manually. And even if you go to the protein version, a single protein, generally the average size of a protein is approx 500 amino acid. So it's also really difficult to align that particular 500 amino acid long protein together, right? So that's why we have developed, and not we, people have actually developed some sort of algorithm and some sort of web servers or programs to do this job for their for them. And they actually, all the servers, and they have their own algorithm. They differ in their algorithm, but they actually go with and they all follow either of these two methods, either the distance method or the similarity method. Okay, but now and they actually calculates everything, and they actually give you a particular score. Now as they give the score is actually defined by a scoring matrix, right? And the scoring matrix, there are two kind of things that are required for a particular scoring of an algorithm, or that algorithm depends on. One is the substitution matrix, another is the gap penalty function. Now what is substitution matrix? Okay, and what is the scoring function? Now we saw that we have a gap penalty, right? We talked about gap, and we now know that there are with each gap there is a penalty associated with each gap, and it's simply like a negative marking, and as the gap length increases, so does the negative mark increases, right? Now we know that these gaps are generally caused by the deletion mutation or insertion mutation, so they are giving you a penalty. But what about substitution mutation? Because substitution mutation is not going to create a gap in your protein or into your sequence, but that is also a difference, right? That's also a difference. So how can we make sure, and how can we introduce this change in the algorithm? For that, people have developed substitution matrix. Substitution matrix means it's simply the people have, there are two kinds of substitution matrix. Okay, one is the PAM, another is the BLOSSOM. Now PAM means point accepted mutation. So generally what is let me just tell you something about the substitution matrix first. So usually what happens, suppose in a particular protein, okay, suppose there's a kind of substitution. Suppose you had a lysine amino acid, and that particular lysine amino acid has been mutated to arginine. Now since lysine and arginine, both of them are positively charged amino acid, a mutation into either one, if a lysine changes to arginine or arginine changes to lysine, mutation of such kind does not generally affect the structure or function of a protein, because the chemical property of the amino acids are same. So if that particular substitution, if it is present in the active site, generally what happens, so that particular role is the role of lysine is also carried out by that particular arginine, because both of them are similarly charged amino acid. The same thing happens if you substitute aspartic acid with glutamic acid, or you substitute suppose or any other similar charged amino acids. So since their chemical property is mostly same, they don't generally alter the function or the structure of a protein. But that's also a mutation, right? So this kind of mutation, which does not alter the structure or function of the protein by a large degree, generally that kind of mutations are accepted mutations that do not harm your protein. That particular thing does not lead to the destruction of a protein. Okay, so these are accepted mutation. Now whenever such kind of mutations or such kind of substitutions are found in the protein, then algorithm generally does not make a huge penalty. It does not take a huge penalty. A substitution of an aspartic acid, suppose a particular positively charged amino acid has been mutated to a negatively charged amino acid. This kind of substitution carries a much more higher penalty. Okay, so these are not accepted penalty. Now based upon this, people have developed a substitution list or a matrix that what kind of mutations are accepted by evolution, and that's how people have developed the PAM and the BLOSSOM. The PAM is actually developed by Margaret Dayhoff in, as you can see, in 1970s. Now generally what happened, PAM means, just give me a minute, okay, just a minute. Yes, so I was talking about PAM. Okay, so this was actually developed by the Margaret Dayhoff in 1970, and this PAM is actually a measure of the rate at which a point mutation that substitutes one amino acid residue for another, and that have been actually incorporated in a gene lineage during evolution. Now a PAM is sometimes used as a unit of evolutionary divergence. Now generally in practice, one PAM is actually equivalent to a unit of evolutionary divergence in which 1% of the amino acid residues of the protein product of the gene have been changed. So on the basis of this PAM model of evolution, this Dayhoff actually invented the amino acid substitution matrix, in which the substitution actually scores between a pair of different amino acid, and they are proportional to the natural log of the ratio of the target frequency to the background frequency. Now what is background frequency? Now these background frequencies are the frequencies of each of these possible substitution, which would actually be determined by the overall frequencies of the different amino acid if the changes were purely random. And these target frequencies that are observed in the substitution frequencies, these are biased towards the substitution of similar amino acid that do not seriously undermine the protein function. So to estimate the target frequencies, a pair of very closely related sequences are actually used to collect these mutated frequencies corresponding to a 1 PAM, and that is followed by the extrapolation of this data to a distance of 250 maps. Okay, and these matrices is often used for both aligning the sequence and also for conducting the homology search, because sometimes what happens is that if you find sometimes that generally what happens is that suppose you have alanine. Okay, now obviously if alanine is substituted by alanine, it will obviously have a 0 score, right? It will obviously have a 0 score. Again, a similarly charged amino acid substitution by a similarly charged amino acid, or a similar chemical nature of amino acid substituted by a similarly chemical nature of amino acid is going to have a very less amount of penalty. For example, if you simply change, suppose you have histidine, okay, and histidine is actually mutated to arginine, now that is going to have a score of 2. Okay, because that's not a huge change. But suppose you have lysine, okay, and that lysine is changed by cysteine. So what will happen? That is going to give you a much more higher negative change, a higher penalty, because those two are not similar kind of amino acid. So that is PAM. So that is PAM, and PAM is actually based upon the global alignment, based upon the whole alignment of the whole sequence taken as a whole. Similarly, people also talks about there was another matrix, and that is known as BLOSUM. So what is BLOSUM? BLOSUM, as you can see, the name suggests, blocks of amino acid substitution matrix. So it is also similar to what should I say, this PAM. It's also similar to PAM, and what it does is actually you can see that and it actually BLOSUM number actually indicates the percentage identity level of the sequence in the alignment. So if you have so there are various kind of BLOSUM. If you have BLOSUM 62, and that means that this the sequence blocks that are clustered in at 62% identical level. So if you say what are difference between PAM and BLOSUM, what will be the difference? Can you say, or can anyone say? See, PAM matrices are generally based on a scoring all amino acid position in related sequences. But these BLOSUM matrices are actually based on substitutions and conserved positions in blocks. And these blocks represent the most alike common regions in related sequences. It does not score every amino acid position. Rather, it scores a block of region. It scores a block of region. Okay. Understand? Now, generally, these BLOSUM is actually used to score the alignment between evolutionary divergent protein sequences, and they are based on the local alignment. Okay, so that means there are two kind of alignment that you can see. One is global alignment, upon which the PAM is based upon, and then you have the local alignment that is based upon the BLOSUM is based upon this local alignment, right? So what do you think is the difference, the global and the what do you mean by the global alignment and the local alignment? Can't say. Okay, I'm going to say next. Just remember this BLOSUM. So like Margaret Dayhoff created BLOSUM. So this she created the PAM. This BLOSUM was actually developed by Henikoff. Okay, Henikoff. And as I've said you that this is only used for its calculation, only blocks of amino acid sequences with very small change between them are considered. And the major thing is that these blocks are called conserved blocks. And one reason for this is that one needs to find a multiple alignment between all these sequence, and it is easier to construct such an alignment with more similar sequences. And another reason is that the purpose of this matrix is actually to measure the probability of one amino acid to change into another. And the change between this distant sequence may also include the insertion and deletion of the amino acids. Okay, but generally we are more interested in conservation of conserved regions inside the protein families where the sequences are quite similar, and therefore we restrict our examination just onto such blocks of amino acid only. Okay, understand? So in case of BLOSUM, you are not selecting one amino acid or a single amino acid. You are simply selecting a block of amino acid, and that block might be a huge chunk of amino acid, a 5 to 6 amino acid region. Okay, that can be like that. Okay, so now about this particular, so now I will talk about this global alignment and the local alignment. So what is this, the global and local? So generally what happens is that in case of again, just give me a minute, okay. I got tired. Whenever I talk too much, I simply get tired a lot. Just give me a minute to catch my breath, okay. Okay. So this global alignment. Now generally there are three type of alignment. One is the global alignment, then we have local alignment, but a certain number of people also say that there's a third kind of alignment, that is semi-global. Now generally a global alignment is actually defined as the end-to-end alignment of two strings S and T. Okay. Now a local alignment of a string S and T is actually an alignment of substrings of T with substrings of S. And in general, they are actually used to find the regions of high local similarity. And often we are more interested in finding this local alignment because we normally do not know the boundary of a particular gene, and only a small domain of the gene may be conserved. In such cases, we actually do not want to enforce that that other non-homologous part of the sequence also align, right? So local alignment is generally useful when searching for a small gene in a large chromosome, or for detecting when a long sequence may have been rearranged, right? And whereas for now this is actually the local alignment, okay? And there are very dynamic programs that are available to find out this local alignment, and the major thing is that the Needle-Hushman algorithm that is perfectly used to find out this local alignment. And for the global alignment also, the Needle-Hushman algorithm also helps you to find out the global alignment also, okay? And for local alignment, you need to modify the Needleman-Wunsch algorithm slightly to start over and find a very new local alignment whenever the existing alignment score goes to negative. And since a local alignment can start anywhere, generally people initialize the first row and column as a matrix to zeros, okay? But for global alignment, you can't take any region, you have to take the whole sequence. So if it's a protein, it's of much greater use, because for a protein you know the start and end site, right? But for a gene, it's really it's difficult to know a particular start and end site, that you don't know where it is starting or ending, because generally the starting and ending position of a particular gene is rarely marked. It's rarely marked, right? And sometimes though, now the sequencing tool have given us enough data to understand the starting of a gene or ending of a gene. But you know, since the sequences are pretty huge and long, it is really difficult to align them together. And we know that in global alignment, it actually attempts to align every residue in every sequences, and they are mostly useful in the sequences in the query set are similar and of roughly equal size. So, but this actually does not mean that a global alignment cannot start or end in gaps, okay? It can also start and end in gaps, but generally we prefer that whenever we go for global alignment, all the regions are they are marked properly. And whenever we generally go for multiple alignment, right? We align multiple sequences together, and so it's better to know start and end site. Otherwise, if you don't know a start or end site and of each of the gene, then what happens? Sometimes you miss the aligning. Because sometimes, suppose for a particular gene you have taken nucleotide 1 to 100, but for another gene you have taken nucleotide 10, you have started from nucleotide 10 and went up to nucleotide 110. Now whenever you do this, the sequence mismatch with one another, and as a result obviously the alignment score also reflects that same mistake, and that sometimes happens that the alignment thing that you get is not the perfect aligned score. So that is a global alignment, and similarly the same thing goes for local alignment also. And but for local alignment you don't need to find the start or end position, you can start anywhere. Okay, and generally it finds regions of ungapped sequences with a high degree of similarity and all. Okay, so now we're going to take a look into another server which can actually help us to find this help us to find out this sequencing. Okay, and help us to find this alignment that we know. So what that program that we're going to use is that ClustalW, but there are multiple programs available. There is BLAST and all, but this ClustalW is much better, I feel, because it helps you to generate an evolutionary tree, and it is much more simpler to use, and the algorithm that this particular method uses, it's also pretty good. Okay, so that's why you can actually use this ClustalW. Okay, fine. So to use that ClustalW system, right? So okay, so I think so I think they have simply moved out of this. No worries, I have already opened it up, so now there is no one. Okay, don't worry. So I have already, I don't know, I'm still sending you the same, because if someone joins you're going to know it. But I'm going on with the class because I already have talked about for 30 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about this cluster element. So what is this ClustalW? What is this ClustalW? Oh, I keep forgetting that there is no one now, so only me. So actually this ClustalW, it's a simpler program. It's another it's like the other Clustal tool, which is actually used for aligning multiple nucleotides or protein sequences in an efficient manner. And generally it uses a progressive alignment method, which aligns the most similar sequences first, and then they work their way down to the least similar sequences until a global alignment is created. This ClustalW that I'm working on, that I'm seeing, it is actually a matrix-based algorithm. But there are, as I've told you, there are also other programs for calculating this aligning, and then there's a program called tCoffee, and there's BLAST. So tCoffee is not based upon this matrix-based algorithm. It is actually a consistency-based. Okay. So this ClustalW actually has a fairly efficient algorithm that actually competes well against other software, and this program actually requires 3 or more sequences in order to calculate a global alignment. But for pairwise alignment, obviously you have to use 2 sequences, right? Now, as I've told you, that this particular software or this particular web server, it actually uses a progressive alignment method, right? And in this, the sequences with the best alignment score are aligned first, and then progressively more distant group of sequences are aligned. And this heuristic approach is actually necessary due to the time and memory demand of finding the global optimal solution. So the first step to the algorithm is actually computing a rough distance matrix between each pair of sequences. Okay, so generally even if you go for the multiple alignment, as you will see, it also always starts with the pairwise sequence alignment, and the next step is actually a neighbor joining method that uses the midpoint routing to create an overall guide tree, and that is a evolutionary tree. And the process it uses to do this is actually shown in detail in a paper which discusses this ClustalW. So you can simply type in the paper that we use the ClustalW thing. Okay, so let's start with this particular thing. So this particular server actually uses both the global and local alignment, and as you know, so actually I have made a list of different proteins. Okay, different proteins, and I'm going to perform the scoring on them. So what you have to do is you have to upload the sequences in the FASTA format, right? You can find the sequences from where? UniProt. And what is FASTA format? FASTA format it starts with a greater than sign. It's nothing that you have to start with a particular format of sequencing. It starts with a greater than sign. Then you write the name of your protein, and from the next line you have to give the 1-letter code of the amino acid. 1-letter code of amino acid. Okay, this is the FASTA format. So even if you don't write the name, nothing will happen. You have to give a greater than sign, but you can't start your protein name just after the greater than sign. You have to start that from the next line. Okay. Now generally, so after you have done this, you only have to, what you have to do now, see, you have to click on this execute multiple alignment, and that's all it's going to need. But first there are many other things that you will see. So first you have the output format. You can change this output format. You can change it to cluster, you can change it to PIR, that is protein information research, or you can change it to FASTA, but I will keep it as cluster because we are going to view this in this particular server only. And next, for the pairwise alignment, there are two kind of method. One is the slow method, another is the fast method. Now this slow method, and obviously you can use the slow method because that is much more accurate, right? And obviously, because if you do a job more slowly and you take your time doing that particular job, the job is going to be much more accurate, right? But sometimes you are in hurry, you have to perform your research very fast. Like for this class, we are going to use the fast method, and obviously the fast method is not going to be highly accurate, but it gives you a pretty good result because the protein that we are using is not of lakhs and lakhs of because whenever you use a nucleotide sequence, it is generally thousands, I mean 10,000 or 5,000, 10,000 nucleotides long, so it's going to take a huge time for the slow cases. But since it's a protein, it doesn't the protein is generally of 500 amino acids, 700 amino acids long, so generally it's not going to take up much time, and it's going to have the similar time. So similarly, after that you have to simply paste in your nucleotide sequences. Okay, so now next comes the last day. Now think of the thing that remember what we used the scoring matrix and the gap penalty. So these are the scoring matrix and the gap penalty that you have to use. The first is the k-tuple words. And then you have the window size, then is the gap penalty. See the gap penalty. Now by default the gap penalty value is kept at 3. Okay, but you can actually change this value. Now suppose for your own research, if you can change this value to 5 or 10, it's up to you, because but whatever you do, whenever you are performing a similar kind of research, try to maintain the parameters similar, keep the parameters similar, because the scoring which you get by keeping a gap penalty of 3 is not going to be the similar if you keep the scoring and if you make the scoring with gap penalty 5. So generally you have to keep it same because the scoring will alter. Okay, so generally it's kept at 3, but it's depending upon your research and depending upon your the work that you are going to do, you can change it. Similarly, you can also change the scoring method. We're going to keep it at % because that gives a better result. Now for the slow accurate method, see the gap opening penalty is 10, whereas the gap extension penalty is the 0.1. Okay, so that means whenever you have the value of C, remember the value of C, the gap opening penalty. So generally the value of C is 10, and for the extension penalty, as you could see in the previous classes, we talked about this extension penalty, right? Remember, gap opening penalty and gap extension penalty E. So this penalty of E, it's going to take up have a value of 0.1. And now you can select your weight matrix. Now you can select the BLOSUM or PAM, or you can select GONET ID. This GONET ID, these are all some scoring matrices. Okay, but generally we use PAM or BLOSUM for our protein, and if it is DNA, you can use the cluster W. Okay, but since this is protein, I'm going to use the BLOSUM. It's going to take the block to do the same thing. And next you again have the same thing for the multiple alignment parameters, the gap opening penalty, a gap extension penalty, and then you have the now in this particular case, as I have told you, now since I'm using, this is a substitution matrix, you can actually use and select the hydrophilic residues for protein. Now when you have given this hydrophilic residues of protein, what happens is that suppose a particular G, so I know that I've told you that this glycine, proline, serine, this aspartic acid, these are lysine, these are arginine, these are the hydrophilic amino acids. So sometimes, so any change of one amino acid with respect of another, so if this lysine, so if a lysine is changed to glycine, it's going to give you a result. It's going to score you accordingly. It's not going to give you a huge negative marks. Why? Because both of them are hydrophilic residues. Both of them are hydrophilic amino acid. So both of them are similar kind of amino acid. Now obviously a change into a similar kind of amino acid is not going to bring a huge penalty. It's not going to give you a huge penalty, because that mutation is accepted by nature. That particular mutation is accepted by nature, and that's not going to hamper either the structure or the function of your protein. Understood? So this is about the major thing of this cluster W, and after that what you have to do, you simply have to click on this particular execute multiple alignment. Okay, and now we can actually divide this alignment into global and local, as I've told you. And global alignment actually try to create an alignment that covers completely both sequences and adding whatever gaps are necessary, whereas the local algorithm actually try to align only the most similar regions. So if removing a particular region from one end of a sequence improves the alignment score, they will do it. Okay, so local alignment are usually the best option unless we are sure that the sequences are very similar in all its extension. And besides, the local alignment algorithm will create a global alignment with both sequences covered if they are similar enough. So if you simply go with the local alignment, you are going to get both the results. Okay, but the main practical problem with local alignment is that they are computationally more demanding than its global equivalent, and that's why people go for this global alignment. Okay, and global alignment are actually usually used whenever we use this multiple alignment algorithm. For example, we have created a multiple, we have executed we are doing a multiple alignment, right? And that's going to happen. So see, whenever we go for whenever I start the execute multiple alignment, it starts to align all these residues. So first it's going to show you the protein that I have used. Now I have actually used the hexokinase protein from various species. Okay, I have used from human, the rat, the mouse, yeast, the bovine, which was a cow. This ponab is it's a orangutan. Okay, then you have the Solanum tuberosum, that is the potato. Like this, I have used the method for several. I have taken several species of what should I say, the hexokinase from several species. So next, as I've told you, it's going to perform the pairwise alignment, right? It's going to perform the pairwise alignment. So it actually does and performs the same, and it shows that when it performs the aligns 1 and 2, that means it aligns the human and the rat, it gives you a score of their 92% similar. Similarly, when they align rat and mouse, they give us score of 90%. But again, it's human and mouse, it gives a score of 90%. Similarly, it also aligns human and mouse, human and yeast, and like it's going to go on. Let's see, 1:2, 1:3, 1:4, 1:5, and it's going to align everything together, right? It's going to align one after another. And whenever such thing happens, generally what happens, you get a particular score. And only after performing this whole score is going to give you the best aligned structure. Okay, it's going to give you a best aligned structure, and it's going to show you which is the alignment is the better. Now kindly see that, in the thing that, so it's going to align every pairwise alignment it happens, and after that it's going to give you a whole score. Now this is the particular alignment. Now see, now as you can see, the hexokinase of this particular Felicia, that is cat, the cat is generally 1056 amino acid long. Okay, whereas the human is only 917 amino acid long. So that means the cat has some certain other residues that are not present in the human or the orangutan and something like that. Okay, so these are the gaps that are created because for Felicia or for cat, the sequence starts from here. So obviously these are all the gaps that are present in all the other species. So right then the mouse starts. The mouse is a much more bigger, so it starts from there, and slowly again you can see these are the gaps. And now see the human, the ponab. This is the ponab is actually it belongs to I forgot the name. It belongs to that animal that's the most closest to us, the bonobo chimpanzee. Okay, so like this. Now see the human, the ponab, the Felicia, they all have the same thing, MIAQL AYYF. See, MIAQL AYYF, MIAQL AYYF. They have similar. Not for mouse. The mouse is a little bit different. but for all other orangutans we have the same. This domain is perfectly the same. So now you can easily understand that this region has been actually inserted into the Felicia. This is actually present and inserted. This is an insertional mutation that has been occurred in case of cat. Okay, and similarly if you go down, you can see that these are the kind of sequences similarity. Now if you see down, go down, you're going to come across several symbols like 2 colons, the dash, the stars. What are these? So when you have the star means this is the conserved domain. Conserved domain means, now see, when you have star, that means every amino acid here, they are similar. They are leucine. So leucine is present in every amino acid, in every species at the similar exact location. So that is highly conserved region. So that means in that particular region the amino acid has not mutated. There are several mutations. See, take anywhere and you are going to get a particular mutation, but not here. So therefore the region which is absolutely conserved, it gives you a star mark. That's the highly conserved region. So what's about this colon? Double colon indicates a very similar region. Very similar means, simply if you take a look into this, you're going to see I, F, M, L, 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 M, 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 M. So most of them contains a region or the amino acid M, and some contains L, and one contains phenylalanine and one contains isoleucine. So these are similar kind of amino acid because leucine, isoleucine, phenylalanine and methionine, they are similar amino acid. So that means though there is a mutation, the mutation has been to a similar kind of amino acid, and that gives you a region that this is a. So if you simply now think of the consensus sequence, so this is a consensus region. So this is a consensus region. Most of them are going to have the residue M in this particular case. So that's why they are given as the most similar regions are given as a double colon, where the single colon means similar region, not highly similar, not greatly similar, but similar region. And if you simply calculate, you're going to find out amino acids that are more or less similar to one another with respect to both physical characteristics and chemical characteristics. Okay, so that's what you can see. The E, Q, that's glutamic acid. The Q is what's Q? The E stands for glutamic acid and the Q stands for glutamine. Q is glutamine, right? No, not glutamine. Q, what's Q? I forgot Q. Okay. And then you have lysine. So it actually tells you that these are similar amino acid, but not highly similar. It doesn't guarantee you a double colon. It's not that similar, but it's more or less similar. So you're going to get a pretty good result there. Okay. So that's what that particular site means. Okay. So that's what it gives you. You can also identify the conserved domains from here. So this is a domain that is highly conserved. See, in this particular domain you have KGF. This is a KGF is a very conserved domain. So now you can simply go to the hexokinase structure, open up the hexokinase structure and look into this particular domain, the KGF domain. Now if you're lucky, you might see that this particular domain is present in the active site. Now obviously the active site will be highly conserved domains, right? So generally the active site or the structure, the regions which gives a proper structure or functionality to that particular enzyme, those are generally the highly conserved domains. So you can identify those domains and like that. So that's about this alignment. But what next? Simply, since I have used 10 protein together, this particular server can also use this information to develop a evolutionary tree. What's that? Now simply come down here, select the tree menu and simply click on this execute. If you execute, it's going to start developing a tree. Okay. It's going to take up some time. Now it's done. Okay. Now see when it have developed this particular thing. Now if I simply come down, this is the evolutionary tree. And what are the basic thing? Now, this is the common ancestor. This is the common ancestor to this 10 species. And this is the evolutionary time that has passed since the first common ancestor. So the first, as you can see, first we're going to have, so this, when this particular common ancestor differentiated, one of them gave you an F2. I forgot which hexokinase this particular belongs to, but this belongs to this particular group of species. Now another species, it also gives rise to two different kinds of branch. One branch goes and gives rise to Solanum tuberosum, that is potato, and another branch, it also branches out to tobacco. So this is the hexokinase of tobacco. So obviously, since both of Solanum tuberosum, that is potato, and tobacco are plant variant, they are placed under the, they are more or less similar, right? And they are placed under the same arm. Next, again, this particular branch which I have developed, which I have differentiated, the other branch gives you a yeast, and then the next branch again gives you a separate branch, and in one branch you have a bovine, and the other branch you have rat and mouse. Now we know that rat and mouse are similar, right? So that's why they are placed under a similar branch, and this particular point is the common ancestor of both rat and mouse. This particular branch, so this particular branch is the common ancestor of cow, rat and mouse, and really, and then you have another branch where you have this Felicia, then you have one branch that gives rise to orangutan, and then you have the two branch, very close neighbor, the most closest neighbor to us. One is the human, that is us, Homo sapiens, and then we have the Ponaba, I forgot the whole name, but this belongs to bonobo chimpanzee. So this bonobo chimpanzee is the other which actually is our closest relative. Okay, and this is actually the distance that has passed since the evolution, since our evolution stopped here, whereas this evolutions went up to this. So you can also use this without branch length. If you don't want to give the branch length and you want to place all them in a single side, you have to clip this and you are going to give exact same branch length. Then you have the without branch length levels. If you don't want to level them, simply take out the level and they are going to get. Then have without branch leaf level. These are the leaf level. You have them, and you don't want the text. Then if you don't want the time scale, don't want. And if you need to save this image, simply click this PNG and it's going to save the image as PNG. Okay. So that's why this particular method or server is very good, because it not only gives you and aligns your sequences together, but also gives you and develops the phylogram also. You can also develop the phylogram. Now obviously you can use this, you can use both protein and nucleic acid sequence here. Since I have used protein, but you can also use nucleic acid sequence here to develop and generate all this data. Okay. Now one important thing that you need to do is that whenever you are developing this, and always make sure that if you are developing an evolutionary tree, make sure you have more than 8, or you have at least 10 different kind of sequences, because the more sequence you have, it's much more better to analyze the sequence, and the more authentic that particular evolutionary tree becomes. And if you use only 2 or 3 sequences, then the evolutionary tree that you gather is not going to have much use. But obviously if you have more than 10, or if you have 20 or 30 sequences, then of course the evolutionary tree that you're going to get is going to be much more authentic, and the data that you can derive out of it is also going to be much more authentic. Understand? So that's about this ClustalW, and this is actually the much more apart from ClustalW, there are various other servers also. You have tCoffee, you have Blast, and all of them work similarly. They perform the same job, but this ClustalW is, I prefer ClustalW because it's so much better accordingly. I have used Blast and all, but I find this ClustalW to be much more better. But of course, to each its own. Each one has their own preferences and all. Okay, so now apart from, so when you remember when I talked about the homology modeling, when performing the homology modeling, you see that there are proteins that actually uses this same functions, right? They uses the same function that you have, you have 1, 2 or 3 suppose proteins, right? We have one protein and it's going to take you have a query template, and now it's going to look into the other various databases to find out the template proteins that are going to use. Now, how do you know that the template proteins, or the template that the particular server is using, that is a better template, or is going to give you a good result? Now, obviously when performing that, always use, what do? You always use this particular server. You always use this particular server to check whether the protein or the template that you are using, or that particular website like Robeta and they have selected, or the iTaser that they have selected, is it a better thing? Because if it is better, if the template is better, you can obviously perform the similar kind of alignment here, perform the similar kind of sequence alignment to check whether the template that you have selected, does it contain more homology? Because obviously the template that you use, or the template that the server use, if it doesn't contain, if the homology between that particular proteins are less than 60% or 70%, or less than 60%, or they are less than 55%, then that's not of much use. Try to keep the template for homology modeling. The template should have more than 80% homology, or at least 70% homology. So you can cross check those in here also. Okay, so that's why this sequence alignment is actually required for both your homology modeling also. Okay, so that will be all, and that will be all for this particular thing. Now also I'm also going to show you one other tool that's going to help you a lot. Okay, that particular tool. So whenever you have a particular molecule, or you develop a particular molecule, or you model a particular protein, that particular protein that you model, generally when you model a protein for, if you're going for drug designing and all, you can model a particular protein. And whenever you model a protein, you need to analyze the structure, like what are the solvent accessible regions, and what are the more things. So one of the things is that SASA, that is solvent accessible region. So there are various servers that are actually used for calculating the solvent accessible regions. So this CAST-P is one of the server that can actually be used to calculate this surface topography of a protein. So whenever, suppose you have modeled a protein, or suppose you have a particular protein, so what do? Simply nothing. You have to simply go to calculation. You have to go to calculation, then simply select the particular protein that you have modeled, or any protein that you have, any protein. Okay, I'm selecting all file, or suppose I have multiple protein. Suppose I have this is a protein, a CAFF with hydrogen, and that protein was actually highlighted. So select that protein and upload that particular protein, keep the radius as 1.4, give your email ID and simply click on submit. And when you click on submit, it's going to give you the job, perform the job, and when finished, it's going to show you the ID. So this is one of the protein that they have, and see, when you perform it, it's going to show you the solvent accessible region. Now, why solvent accessible region is important? Because the region where the solvent can actually access your protein, those are the region that can also be accessed by the drug molecule. Suppose if you are into drug designing and you have modeled a protein for drug ligand binding and all. Now, if you find out a particular region, and suppose you find out a particular region there, and you find that the drug is going to bind here, but in reality it might not, because if that particular region is off limit, suppose that particular region is a hydrophobic region. Now, of course, our drug can't go and bind to or interact with the hydrophobic region, because that part is not accessible by the water, and the drug will obviously be mixed up with water to access that region. So in that particular case, you have to find out the regions where the solvent accessible regions only, and then you can use those regions which are solvent accessible to use them as a drug. So in this particular case, see, so whenever you do that, there are various kind of pockets. Okay, so when you perform that, it's going to show you various pockets. So this is the first pocket, second pocket. Now if the first pocket is selected, so that's highlighted. Let me highlight 5 pockets, and I'm going to change the color also, so that you can each identify. We can identify different pocket by the different color. Okay, and now I will let's want to be, yeah, let's keep the meta. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so see, these are the various kind of pockets, the first 5 pockets that I've highlighted. This is the first pocket, then I have second, third pocket. These are the solvent accessible regions. Now the first pocket, obviously the red region, it has an area of 423.56. okay, and this is the volume. Okay, this is a Armstrong cube, and this is the area. This is the volume of the region. Now obviously, if you want your molecule, or if you want any ligand to bind here, the volume of that ligand or the area of the ligand must be less than that, because if you design a ligand that is more than this particular volume, then that particular ligand will fail to enter this surface, okay, enter this area. And what are these pockets created of? What are the amino acids that are present here? See, you have in case of pocket 1, you have this leucine, 49th leucine, and it belongs to carbon. And then you can simply scroll down and see the 49th leucine. It is composed of 49th leucine, the 50th glycine, and you can also get to see the atoms that are present in this particular region. the 51st threonine, the first and 52nd glycine. So and you can get to see the amino acids that are present here. These are the amino acids that comprises of this particular pocket. Okay, the level 1 mentions all the first pocket only, and if you simply go there, see, and whenever you see this second 2, that we see the second pocket. This belongs to the second pocket, and the second pocket here. Okay, I don't know what's the color of the second pocket. Second pocket was blue. Okay, so this is the second pocket. So this pocket has a volume of 50 angstrom cube, and this is composed of this valine, 15th valine, 18th phenylalanine, and 100th phenylalanine, 152nd leucine, 155th glutamate, like this. You get the idea, right? So you can actually do this and to find out the solvent accessible regions. And apart from that, there are also multiple options. There are multiple reasons for which why people use this, and this gives the overall idea about the whole pocket. See, this is the region. This red region that belongs to the, I think, the first carbon. The first pocket. So if you simply select a region, it's going to highlight and show you the region where this particular thing is present. This is the this belongs to the blue, so this belongs to the second region, I think. Okay, so like this you can also find out there, and these are really important. And suppose you need to develop a particular inhibitor, for an enzyme. So obviously you need to find out the accessible regions or the active site. Now for that, you don't want to find the accessible region, you want to find the active site, right? And like that you can find out the regions and why it is important. So this is one of the things, the surface topography of protein, and this also has much higher implications, not only for drug designing but also for other research purposes. Okay, so that will be all. And for the next, now this is the whole syllabus that I was actually I intended to show you. And so what to do is I'm going to actually share you this video, of course, and then I'm going to give you a particular project. I'm going to give you a protein, and I will actually ask you to have a look at a protein of clinical importance, or any protein whose structure is unsolved. Develop or model that particular protein. Okay, and when you have modeled that particular protein, try to go to the server to find out the template that they are using. Cross check that particular template sequences in the by cluster W. Cross check whether the template that the particular server is used if it is good enough, and then perform the sequencing. Okay, and then also take this particular thing and calculate the surface topography of that particular protein. Okay, and the area that you think might be a very good target for your drug or something like that. I'm going to mail you all. Okay, since I'm going to mail you the detailed project. Now it's not a project that per se that you have to do it, or I'm going to give you marks. I'm just going to see that whatever you have learned. So if you can use that particular thing to develop something or to write something, because if you can do that, then it's going to have a much more meaning, right? And it's going to hone your skill also. Now when you perform that, if you find out any difficulty, you can ask me that these are the things that I can't do, or this is the thing where I can understand, and like that, and I will help you. Okay, so that will be all. Okay, so thank you. That will be all, everyone.